My name is Aurelia Beaumont, and for most of my 28 years, I have lived my life as a river stone, smoothed over by the constant, gentle pressure of my family's expectations. I grew up in Willow Creek, a city that feels more like a town cradled by misty, evergreen-covered hills and perpetually damp air that smells of pine and wet earth. My work as a landscape architect is quiet and deliberate. I spend my days designing gardens and parks, creating pockets of serenity for others. It's a profession that suits me, one that requires patience and an understanding of how things grow, when to nurture them, and when to let them be. My life has always been intertwined with my younger sister, Saraphina. She is 3 years my junior, and where I am the sturdy, deep-rooted oak, she has always been the willow, graceful, mutable, and bending with every breeze of inspiration that passes through her. Our parents, in their own well-intentioned way, fostered this dynamic from the beginning. They saw me as capable and resilient, and Saraphina as a delicate artist, a creative soul who needed protection from the harsh practicalities of the world. This narrative began in our childhood. When we were given our weekly allowance, a crisp $5 bill each, mine would be carefully folded and tucked into a small wooden box, saved for a book or a set of drawing pencils I coveted. Seraphina's would vanish within a day, transformed into a cascade of stickers, candy, and shimmering gel pens. When her funds were depleted, my mother's gentle voice would drift into my room. "Aurelia, honey, Saraphina is so sad she can't buy that new Lisa Frank folder. You have some money left. It's important for family to share." It was never a command, but an appeal to my better nature, a lesson in generosity that came at my expense. To refuse would have been to label myself as selfish, a word that felt like a sharp stone in my throat. So, I would open my box, and my savings would dwindle for the sake of her fleeting happiness. The pattern was set, the channels of giving and taking carved deep into the bedrock of our family. As we grew older, the stakes became higher. I worked part-time through high school at a local nursery, the scent of soil and damp leaves clinging to my clothes. The money I earned was my own, a small measure of independence that I treasured. It bought my first car, a reliable, second-hand sedan, and funded my application fees for college. Saraphina, meanwhile, was encouraged to focus on her artistic development. She didn't have a job. Her time was for painting, for poetry, for exploring her passions without the burden of financial worry. When she needed money for a school trip to the city art museum or a new set of expensive oil paints, the expectation would fall silently upon me. "Your sister has a wonderful opportunity," my father would say, his tone casual. "You're doing so well with your job." It would mean the world to her. Helping felt like a duty, an extension of my role as the older, more responsible sister. I left for college to study landscape architecture, putting 2 states between myself and the suffocating weight of those expectations. For a few years, there was breathing room. I was a struggling student, and my financial well was understood to be dry. Saraphina began her own college journey a year after I graduated, enrolling in a business program with a focus on marketing, a choice that surprised everyone. She claimed she wanted to learn how to turn her art into a viable enterprise. I had just started my career at a small but respected firm in Willow Creek called Verdant Designs. My salary was modest, barely enough to cover my rent on a small one-bedroom apartment with a balcony, my student loan payments, and the simple cost of living. But to my parents, my steady income signaled a return to the old dynamic. The requests began again, cloaked in the language of support and family unity. It started with her tuition deposit, then a request for funds to cover a new laptop because her old one was stifling her creativity. The big shift came about a year ago. Saraphina, with our parents' enthusiastic backing, decided to launch her own business, a brand she called Elysian Blooms. It was an artisanal venture specializing in handcrafted soaps, essential oil blends, and soy wax candles infused with locally foraged botanicals. It was, in every sense, quintessentially Saraphina, beautiful, idealistic, and financially precarious. I watched from a distance as she poured her energy into crafting a brand aesthetic, designing elegant packaging, and filling our parents' garage with the fragrant, chaotic mess of her production line. They never asked me for my opinion, but they frequently asked for my money. The initial investment is just to get her off the ground, Aurelia, my mother would explain over the phone. Once her products are in a few boutiques, she'll be able to pay you back. I loved my sister, and a part of me wanted to believe in her dream, so I helped. I transferred a few $100s for high-quality ingredients, then another $1,000 for a booth at a prestigious local craft fair. Each time, I felt a familiar pang of resentment, a feeling I quickly buried under the guise of familial love. My relationship with alcohol, or rather my lack thereof, was another point of gentle, persistent friction. In my first year of college, I discovered that my body processes alcohol in a spectacularly poor fashion. A single glass of wine would leave me disoriented and ill, and on one memorable and miserable occasion, 2 sips of a cocktail resulted in a complete blackout. Since then, I've abstained entirely. It's a simple, non-negotiable boundary for my health. My family knew this, but they struggled to accept it. At holiday gatherings or family dinners, my father would hold up a bottle of wine. "Just a small glass, Aurelia? Don't be a hermit." My refusal was always met with sighs and soft, disappointed looks, as if my sobriety was a personal slight, a rejection of their hospitality. It wasn't about the drink itself, it was about their dismissal of a boundary I had set for my own well-being. The requests for Elysian blooms escalated. The initial loans I had provided were absorbed into the growing enterprise with no mention of repayment. Then, about 6 months ago, I was promoted to a project manager position at Verdant Designs. It wasn't a monumental leap, but it came with a significant salary increase and more creative control. I was proud of myself. I had worked hard for it. I called my parents to share the good news, my voice filled with a rare, bright enthusiasm. My mother's response was immediate and deflating. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. So how much more are you making now?" Before I could even answer, she pivoted. "This is perfect timing. Saraphina has a chance to expand her business, a big order for a hotel spa, but she needs to scale up production. She needs capital for materials and to rent a small studio space." The unspoken question hung heavy in the air between us. There was no congratulations, no acknowledgement of my achievement. There was only the familiar calculation of what my success could mean for my sister. That was the moment the river stone finally resisted the current. Something inside me, worn smooth for years, found a hard edge. I said no. I didn't raise my voice or issue an ultimatum. I just said, calmly and quietly, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." The silence that followed was profound. Then came the soft, wounded protests. "But she's your sister. We're a family. You can afford it." I held my ground. The conversation ended with a clipped, cold goodbye from my mother. A few days later, my father called. "Your sister is in serious trouble, Aurelia. Elysian Blooms is in debt. She mismanaged the finances, and she owes her suppliers a great deal of money. If she can't pay them, they're threatening legal action. It will ruin her." He named the sum, and my breath caught in my chest. $25,000. "She's devastated. You're the only one who can help her." The familiar weight settled on my shoulders, heavier than ever before. I needed to understand the full picture, to hear it from her. I called Saraphina directly. Her voice was thick with tears. She confessed she'd been overly optimistic, placing huge orders for raw materials she couldn't afford, convinced a big contract was just around the corner. Now, the bills were due, and she was facing the collapse of her dream and a reputation in tatters before she had even truly begun. "It's my whole future, Aurelia," she pleaded. "If this gets out, if I have to declare bankruptcy, I'll never be able to start another business. No one will trust me." I listened, and for the first time, I didn't feel her pain as my own. I felt a deep, aching sadness for the dynamic that had brought us to this point. "Saraphina," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands, "I love you. But I can't fix this for you. I won't. I have been helping you my entire life, but this is a hole I cannot and will not fill." She called me cold, heartless, and selfish, the word that had been used to shape me for years. But this time, it didn't sting. It felt like a shield. After that conversation, they severed the connection. 3 months of absolute silence followed. No calls, no texts, not even a forwarded email. It was a stark, deliberate excision. I mourned the loss, but I also felt a strange, quiet lightness, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. Then, last week, a message appeared on my phone. It was from my mother. A picture of the first roses blooming in her garden, a peace offering of sorts. A few days later, a text from the family group chat, which I had not been removed from. We're having a family dinner on Sunday. Just the 4 of us. We'd love for you to come. No apology. No mention of the money or the fight. Just an invitation back into the fold. A part of me, the part that longed for the simple comfort of family, wanted to believe they had accepted my boundary. I thought perhaps they had finally understood. So, with a cautious heart, I agreed to go, convincing myself that it was a step toward a new, healthier beginning. The house I grew up in was a place of conflicting memories. It was a sturdy, 2-story craftsman with a wide, welcoming porch, but the warmth of its architecture was often at odds with the cool currents of tension that flowed within its walls. The garden, however, was my sanctuary. I had helped my mother design it years ago, a tapestry of native ferns, hydrangeas, and winding stone paths. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the lavender bushes I had planted, their purple spires reaching for the gray, overcast sky. A pang of nostalgia, sweet and painful, resonated in my chest. My mother greeted me at the door with a smile that seemed a little too bright, a little too practiced. "Aurelia, we're so happy you're here." She enveloped me in a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. My father echoed the sentiment, rising from his armchair with a careful, almost formal pleasantry. Saraphina was already at the dining table, looking down at her phone, her thumb tracing patterns on the screen. She offered me a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The table was set with the good china, reserved for special occasions. At my place, a tall glass of iced tea waited, beads of condensation trickling down its side. It was my mother's special blend of homebrewed lavender and honey tea, a flavor synonymous with summer evenings on the porch. "I made your favorite," she said, her voice laced with a determined cheerfulness. "Thank you, Mom," I replied, taking my seat. The gesture felt like an olive branch, and I wanted to accept it. The conversation started tentatively, navigating the shallow waters of safe topics. My work at Verdant Designs. The terrible traffic on the bridge. My father's ongoing battle with the squirrels in the bird feeder. I played my part, offering polite responses and measured smiles. Saraphina was unusually quiet, contributing little, her gaze often drifting towards the window. Through it all, a subtle, unspoken tension hummed beneath the surface, a low frequency of unresolved conflict. Halfway through the main course, a delicious rosemary chicken that tasted of home, my phone vibrated quietly in my purse on the floor beside me. I discreetly pulled it out, keeping it below the level of the table. It was a text from a number I recognized as belonging to Julian, Saraphina's boyfriend. He was a kind, gentle person, a musician who often seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of my family. The message was short and alarming. "Aurelia, I hope this doesn't sound crazy. Please find a reason to go home. I can't explain now. Just trust me." I stared at the words, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. Around me, the dinner continued its performance of normalcy. My father was now complaining about a new city ordinance. My mother was nodding, offering sympathetic sounds. It was a scene from any other family dinner, yet a cold dread began to seep into my bones. "Excuse me," I said, placing my napkin on the table. "I just need to use the restroom." No one paid me much mind. I walked up the familiar carpeted stairs to the second floor, my footsteps muffled. I didn't go to the main bathroom. Instead, I went into my old bedroom at the end of the hall. It was mostly unchanged, a museum of my younger self. I closed the door, the quiet click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silent house. I sat on the edge of my old bed, the patchwork quilt I'd had since I was 16 beneath me. My hands were trembling slightly as I pressed the call button next to Julian's name. He answered on the first ring, his voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "Are you out of there? Julian? What's going on? Your text scared me." There was a pause, and I could hear his strained breathing. I shouldn't be doing this, he said, his voice cracking. They'd kill me if they knew I was talking to you. Saraphina told me everything. Told you everything about what? The plan, he whispered, and the word hung in the air, heavy and menacing. It's the iced tea, Aurelia. They put something in it. A sedative. Saraphina said your mom got it from a friend who has trouble sleeping. It's strong. The room felt suddenly cold. I looked at my hands, at the familiar patterns of the quilt, trying to ground myself in reality. The sweet, floral scent of the lavender tea I had been so touched by now seemed sinister. Why? I managed to ask, my own voice in near whisper. The money, he said, the word tumbling out in a rush of guilt. The $25,000. They're going to wait for you to fall asleep. They're going to use your thumbprint to unlock your phone and transfer the money from your investment account. Saraphina, she said you wouldn't even notice. She told them about how you sometimes get woozy, how you blacked out once. They think you'll just assume you had a bad reaction to something you ate. A profound, hollow silence filled my old bedroom. The sound of my own blood roaring in my ears was the only thing I could hear. Betrayal wasn't a strong enough word. This was a violation, a quiet, calculated act of violence, cloaked in the guise of love and family. They weren't just asking for my money anymore. They were planning to take it, using my body and my trust against me. Julian was still talking, his voice filled with shame. They think they're saving her. They've convinced themselves it's not really stealing, that it's just borrowing. They said you'd understand eventually. I told Saraphina it was wrong, that it was insane, but she wouldn't listen. I couldn't let them do it, Aurelia. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Julian, I said, my voice strangely calm. A chilling clarity was descending upon me, pushing through the shock and the hurt. I was no longer a river stone being worn down. I was the bedrock itself, and I would not be moved. Thank you for telling me. I ended the call and sat there for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. I thought about walking downstairs, confronting them, and letting the ensuing explosion shatter our family forever. I could have stormed out, leaving them with the knowledge that I knew. But that would have been their story to tell, their drama to spin. They would have painted me as hysterical, as overreacting. No, this story had to be mine. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the old dresser mirror. The young woman looking back at me seemed tired but resolute. My hands were steady now. I knew what I had to do. Before I left the room, I opened an app on my phone, one I used for work to record ambient sounds and take audio notes on job sites. With a few quiet taps, I set it to record in the background, the screen remaining dark. I slipped the phone into the front pocket of my jeans and walked back downstairs, my mind clear and cold as a winter sky. When I returned to the dining room, a mask of placid calm settled over my features. I picked up my glass of iced tea, the condensation making it cool against my fingertips. My mother watched me, her expression a careful blend of concern and anticipation. "Everything okay, dear?" she asked. I gave a small, appreciative smile and took a tiny, performative sip, letting the liquid barely touch my tongue before I set the glass down. The taste was cloyingly sweet. "Delicious, Mom." "Tastes just like summer," I said. The lie felt surprisingly easy. For the rest of the meal, I engaged in the pretense of normalcy, a silent observer at my own betrayal. I listened as my father recounted a story about his golf game. I nodded as my mother discussed her book club's latest selection. And I watched Saraphina, who steadfastly avoided my gaze, her guilt a palpable aura around her. With each passing moment, my resolve hardened. This was not about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about drawing a boundary so clear and so final that it could never be crossed again. As my father was clearing the plates, I saw my chance. I feigned a slight stumble as I stood up, pressing a hand to my forehead. "Whoa," I said softly, allowing a slight slur into my voice. "I feel really strange all of a sudden. A little dizzy." Instantly, all three of them were a flurry of coordinated concern. My mother was at my side, her hand on my arm. "What is it, honey? Are you feeling faint?" "I'm just so tired," I murmured, letting my eyelids flutter. "I think I just need to lie down for a minute." It was exactly what they wanted to hear. There was no hesitation, no suspicion. They were the perfect portrait of a loving, caring family. My father guided me to the living room couch, his touch gentle. Saraphina appeared with a pillow, her movements quick and anxious. My mother draped a soft, cashmere blanket over me. They were treating me like something precious, something to be protected, even as they prepared to rob me. I lay down on the familiar floral sofa, closed my eyes, and focused on my breathing, slowing it to a deep, even rhythm. The scent of my mother's perfume, a fragrance I had associated with comfort my entire life, now smelled of deceit. I felt a profound, bottomless sorrow for the family I thought I had, the love I thought was unconditional. I waited, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The distant hum of the refrigerator. Then, the whispers began. "Is she asleep?" It was my mother's voice, hushed and cautious. "I think so," Saraphina replied, her voice trembling slightly. "She's out." It worked just like Mom's friends said it would. "Okay," my father said, his tone low and businesslike. "Let's get this done quickly. The less time we spend, the better." I heard the soft rustle of my jeans as one of them reached into my pocket and carefully retrieved my phone. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my breathing remained steady. I was a statue, a sleeping figure in their carefully constructed play. Then I felt the chilling, intimate touch of my mother's fingers gently taking my hand, lifting my thumb, and pressing it firmly against the phone's sensor. There was a faint vibration. Unlocked. The quiet horror of it was breathtaking. The sheer, coordinated audacity of it. They were my parents, my sister. They had tucked me in at night, kissed my scraped knees, and celebrated my birthdays. Now, they were huddled together in the dim light of the living room, using my own body to violate my trust and steal from me. "Okay, I'm in," Saraphina whispered, her voice a mix of relief and nerves. I heard the frantic tapping of her fingers on the screen. "Find the investment app," my father instructed. "The blue one. Aurelia showed it to me once. All of her savings are in there." "I see it," she said. More tapping. "Okay, routing number, account number. She has it all saved." "How much are we taking?" "Just what you need," my mother said softly, her voice filled with a warped sort of justification. "Just the 25,000. We're not cleaning her out. It's just enough to settle the debts. She'll barely even notice it's gone. If we do this right, she'll think she did it herself in a daze and forgot." There it was. Their entire rationale laid bare. It wasn't a theft in their minds, it was a necessary, parental intervention. They were correcting what they saw as my selfishness, restoring the family's equilibrium at my expense. "I told you this would work," Saraphina said, a note of triumph in her voice. "She always gets loopy when she's not feeling well. We just needed to give her a little push." A push. That's what they called drugging me. A frustrated sigh from Saraphina cut through the quiet. "It's asking for a verification code." "Eh, what?" my father asked, his voice sharp with irritation. "Two-factor authentication," she muttered. "It just sent a code to her email. I can't get in without it." She must have set it up recently. I had. After a cybersecurity seminar at work a few months prior, I had methodically secured all of my financial and personal accounts. It was a simple, practical step I had taken to protect myself from anonymous, faceless threats, never once imagining the threat would come from inside my own home, from the people whose DNA I shared. "Try the bank app," my dad urged. "Maybe that one's different." More tapping, followed by another curse from Saraphina. "Same thing. Everything is locked down with a second code." Damn it. Silence descended upon the room, thick with their frustration and failure. The grandfather clock ticked on, marking the seconds of their thwarted conspiracy. "Put the phone back," my mother said finally, her voice flat with defeat. "Just put it back in her pocket." I felt the phone being gently slipped back into place. I waited another minute, letting them retreat back to the dining room, their whispers now laced with panic and recrimination. Then, slowly, I began to stir. I opened my eyes, blinking as if adjusting to the light. I sat up, running a hand through my hair, and looked at them with a carefully crafted expression of groggy confusion. "Wow," I said, my voice thick with sleep. "I'm so sorry." I don't know what came over me. I feel like I completely blacked out for a minute. The three of them stared at me, their faces a mixture of feigned concern and raw, undisguised shock. They looked like actors who had forgotten their lines. "Are you sure you're all right, Aurelia?" my father asked, his voice strained. "Yeah, I think so," I said, getting to my feet. I picked up my purse from the floor and slung it over my shoulder. "Actually, I think I should probably head home. I have an early start tomorrow." They didn't protest. There were no awkward attempts to convince me to stay. Just a quiet chorus of agreement. "Of course, dear. Get home safe. Let us know you've arrived." At the front door, the final act of our charade played out. My mother reached for me, and by sheer ingrained habit, we hugged. Then my father. Then Saraphina, her touch light and fleeting, as if she were afraid I might break. Each embrace was a ghost of a memory, a farewell to a life that was now over. As I held them, I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost buckled my knees. This is the last time, I thought. This is the last hug. After tonight, there is no coming back from this. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I stepped back and gave them a small, sad smile. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "Anytime, sweetheart," my mother replied, her own smile a fragile, paper-thin thing. I opened the door, stepped out into the cool, damp night air, and didn't look back. I had not confronted them. I had not accused them. I had not said a word about what I knew. But as I walked to my car, my hand went to my pocket, to the small, silent device that had recorded every whispered word, every damning confession. They thought I was unconscious, but I had never been more awake. The drive to the police station was surreal. The familiar streets of Willow Creek, lined with sleeping houses and tall, dark fir trees, seemed like a set from a movie I was no longer a part of. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. There was no rage, no hysteria. There was only the quiet, heavy certainty of what I had to do. Filing a police report was not an act of revenge. It was an act of survival, the final, non-negotiable boundary. I walked into the station, the air smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant. I explained to the officer at the front desk, a woman with tired eyes, that I needed to report a crime. She asked what kind. "My family drugged me and attempted to steal money from my accounts," I said, my voice even. "I have an audio recording of the entire event." Her weary expression sharpened into one of focused attention. She led me to a small, quiet room, and a detective named Miller took my statement. He was a patient man who listened without interruption as I recounted the evening's events. I didn't cry. I simply laid out the facts, from the history of financial expectation to the conversation with Julian to the whispers I had recorded in the living room. Then, I played the audio file from my phone. We sat in silence for the full 7 minutes, the voices of my parents and my sister filling the small, sterile room with their self-justifying conspiracy. When it was over, Detective Miller looked at me, his expression grim. "This is attempted grand larceny, conspiracy, and administering a substance without consent, Miss Beaumont," he said quietly. "This is extremely serious." "I know," I replied. I forwarded him the audio file and showed him the login attempts on my banking and investment apps, their timestamps perfectly aligning with the recording. He took meticulous notes, his professionalism a comforting anchor in the wreckage of my life. He asked if I had a safe place to go if I needed support. I told him I had my own apartment, my own life. I was safe. 2 days later, the storm broke. My phone lit up with a fusillade of messages. The first was from my mother. "Did you call the police on your own family?" It was followed by another. "What have you done?" Saraphina left a frantic, tearful voicemail. "It was a mistake, Aurelia. Just a stupid mistake. You're making it so much worse than it had to be. You're destroying everything." My father's message was steeped in a tone of wounded authority. "You think the law is the answer to a family problem? You don't do this to your own blood. You're tearing this family apart." I crafted a single response and sent it to all 3 of them. "You drugged me. You tried to rob me. That is not a family problem. That is a felony." Then I did what I should have done years ago. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their social media profiles. I created a digital wall so high and so thick that their words could never reach me again. The silence that followed was not the punitive, heavy silence of before. It was a clean, quiet, and blessedly empty space. It was the sound of my own freedom. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the recording, my parents and sister accepted a plea bargain. They received 2 years of probation, significant fines, mandatory counseling, and a court-enforced no-contact order. There was no prison time, but the verdict was a public record, a permanent stain on their reputation in our small, interconnected community. I never sought out information about them, but news travels on the quiet currents of a town like Willow Creek. I heard from a former neighbor that they had to sell the house with the garden I had designed, to cover their legal fees and debts. Saraphina's dream of Elysian blooms dissolved, and Julian, I learned, had moved out of their shared apartment a week after the arrest. Some things, it seems, break under the strain of such a betrayal. About a year later, I saw Saraphina. I was in a large home and garden store in the next town over, looking for terracotta pots for my apartment balcony. I saw her from a distance, wearing the orange apron of a store employee. She was stocking shelves in the plumbing aisle, her movements mechanical, her face pale and drawn. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the wide aisle. In her gaze, I saw a flicker of shame, of resentment, of a deep, unbridgeable sorrow. She turned away quickly, making herself busy with a display of PVC pipes. I paid for my pots and walked out, the brief encounter leaving a dull ache in my chest. I have found a different kind of peace now. My life is small, quiet, and entirely my own. My balcony is a thriving jungle of herbs, flowers, and tomato plants. I spend my weekends hiking in the misty hills that surround the city, finding solace in the silent company of ancient trees. I am still a landscape architect, still in the business of creating serenity, but now I am cultivating it for myself first. The pain of what my family did has not vanished. It has become a part of my own inner landscape, like a fault line that has reshaped the terrain. But it is not a desolate landscape. It is one where new things are beginning to grow, in the quiet, fertile ground of self-respect. Last week, an email arrived in my inbox. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the sender's name was simply Saraphina. The subject line was blank. I clicked it open, my heart beating a little faster. The body of the email contained a single word. Sorry. I stared at the word on the screen for a long time. It was so small, yet it held the weight of a shattered world. It was an ending, a beginning, a question. I thought about the sister I had loved, the family I had lost, and the woman I had become in their absence. I closed my laptop, walked out onto my balcony, and breathed in the cool, clean air. I didn't know if I would ever reply, but for the first time, I knew the choice was mine. And that was enough.